Hello and welcome to the Warhammer Podcast, episode 111. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
And we have a pretty fun episode today. After the seriousness and rules-orientedness of last week, we are switching it up to do a more lighthearted intro tier episode talking about lore.
Yeah, this should be an enlightening one for me. And I mean, it's kind of a nice segue into our next week episode as well.
Yes, which we'll get to the news for that in a moment, but today's episode is essentially going to be a tier list.
We're going to be talking about the factions and the lore that they have access to.
Right.
Get rid of your fucking ranking tier list bullshit.
No, we're becoming a tier list channel.
No, we're not.
All tier lists all the time.
I'm not that desperate yet.
So without any further ado, let's get into this. But first, a quick news stop.
Sounds good. All right, you pumped the brakes real hard for this news stop, so I hope it's important.
Yes, I didn't want to do all this at the end, and it's all very quick.
It's not just a shout out to our merch. Go buy our merch. It's great.
Which, while we're shamelessly doing that, literally the day we record this, Orchid 8 just updated with their new fancy website we've been helping with, designing for specifically for our page, but also giving some feedback. If you go to our page on Orchid 8 now, it's all nice and pretty.
It's a really clean design. I'm pretty happy with what we ended up getting. But yeah, Orchid 8, our page, Warhammer. It's new. It's shiny. Buy our merch.
And I guess to go in the order of when this will be important, next week's episode is the 40K book club episode for Fall of Cadia. I've got 8 hours left to read this week, so I gotta crank that out before we record next week.
Got a few pages left.
How many pages, Eric?
I don't know.
What percentage of the book, Eric?
It's a perfectly legal digital version that tells me exactly what page number I'm on.
Ah, I see. The Brazilian method.
Yeah. Yes. It fell off a truck. I think I'm about halfway.
As a reminder to all the cops in the audience, Eric already bought the audiobook. He just noped out.
We'll get into it.
We'll get into that next week. I have many words.
I have a few words, especially because I've done a few other things in addition to testing, and I got some hot takes that I feel kind of bad about.
I don't feel bad.
So, yeah, next week, this is your last call to read it beforehand.
And you can't show up and be like, I didn't know this was going to be filled with spoilers. Spoilers, Cadia Falls.
I haven't gotten there yet. The hell?
My wife is further than both of us. She's almost done.
That's not surprising at all.
I know.
I mean, one, you gave her an actual book, and two, she's not stuck to your reading speed.
Fuck you. You have the same slow reading speed.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's just, I'm honestly kind of shocked that she didn't finish it in like 3 days. I'm assuming it's because work has been work.
Yeah.
So,
as a final note for the week, we hit 100,000 subscribers yesterday. And as we promised, we're doing a questions and answer episode for 100K. It will be the week after book club, so 2 weeks from this episode. And I have a thread that you can find on our YouTube comments here. I'll pin a comment that points to the community post. This will be your basically last call for when we do that. We're doing a live episode for our patrons on May 3rd, where we will be doing the Q&A episode. And then you guys will hear it the week after.
yeah, it should be a fun little episode. And I mean, I guess that does depend on what questions are asked. But I don't know, man. It's crazy for 100K.
It is.
Definitely doesn't really seem real.
And make sure to ask us questions, because I think what I'm going to do for it is make us suffer 100K, 100 questions.
Oh, thank God.
What, 100,000 questions?
I was like, that's one, extremely optimistic on how many questions we're going to get.
We already have like over 500 of them that people have asked, so I still already can pick, but I want more.
Yeah, no, but it's like, I want to sleep at some point. Yeah, no, I think I can get behind 100 questions, 100K.
All right, well, 9 minutes of the last 10 minutes of our discussion has been cut. That's your news. Let's jump into the episode proper now.
Sounds good. All right, Brad, you like lore.
Like is a strong word. Sometimes I suffer lore.
Well, okay, you have emotional attachment to lore in some way.
That's a correct take.
What the hell is the idea on this one? Are we just gonna like go through books? Are we gonna like in 1978 Warhammer was
No. Let me set the room up for everybody.
All right.
I saw a random comment on Reddit like last week. I'll never find it. But it was some poor soul who said like, hey, I started this edition with Tyranids. I really like lore, but I'm kind of miffed about the fact that I started with a faction that has no lore.
I was gonna say that was like everything was like, hey, you started with Tyranids. That's awesome, man. This is a great time to start with Tyranids, other than the lore part. That fell off a cliff very quickly.
So I figure this is a great intro level episode of like, what faction should you get into if you care about their lore? Who has good lore? Who has a ton of lore? Who has no lore? Who has terrible lore? We'll get there. We're focusing on like book tier lore, not like you can go read your 20 pages in the front of your codex. So I put some ground rules for what we were like counting in this.
Yeah, because there's like a lot of like, there's a lot of really old stuff because Warhammer's been around for a long time.
And I know this is a topical thing to talk about. Warhammer is made out of retcons. It constantly is retconned.
Well, yeah, it's an evolving game universe. That's just kind of how that works.
To give an example, a couple weeks ago, there were not female Custodes. Now there has always been female Custodes. Get over it.
Yeah.
I have people comment who complain that they're still not over the fact that they retconned the existence of Primarchs, which is something for those complaining about female Custodes. Your favorite Primarch, whoever they are, is also a retcon. Everything in 40K is a retcon.
That's fair. I didn't know that about the Primarchs.
The entirety of the Horus Heresy is a backfill because they wanted to explain why they had a game where you had the Knights versus Knights that they were developing, and they needed to explain why they only made one type of model to be both sides, and they're both Imperium, and they're like, there was a civil war in the Imperium long ago called the Horus Heresy, and then they just went wild.
So that's just kind of how it works when you're trying to also balance like a game around lore, around models.
It's
like...
all a product. The lore is the excuse. The product is what you're being sold. This is a bonus lecture because I'm sick of the bullshit from the last couple weeks that were going on when I recorded this.
Yeah, I mean, you've been dealing with it.
I've had to moderate the internet during this time period, and it hasn't been enjoyable.
Boy, all of that said.
So we needed a start point because the entire game is made out of retcons, and it's kind of useless to read lore from many retcons ago.
I mean, generally for the lore aspect, like there can still be good novels and good stories.
Absolutely, which we'll get to an example in a moment. But I had to set a date. And when we record this episode, it is exactly 18 years to the month of the first book of Horus Heresy.
No shit.
So I said 18 years is our cutoff. You have to be newer than the first book, Horus Rising.
It feels like that should be like truly ancient, but I guess 18 years is pretty long.
So 2006 or newer is basically our line. To put this in perspective, when we get to Guard, that means I banned Caiaphas Cain, even though it's a great series. The first few books are not part of this. And First and Only in the beginning of Gaunt's Ghost is also before this time period. So I'm not even including those. There are still good books that are made before this date, but it's the line I'm making in the sand here.
So it's kind of like an era of like, we're going to be talking post-Horus Heresy, modern era that's likely to have some retcons still, but like generally the scope is going to be the current canon.
Yeah, basically every major faction is essentially the same at this point as they were at the beginning of that.
Okay.
Some of them allow girls in the clubhouse now, which is pretty nice.
Right.
Space Marines, one day. Wait until people find out that's been retconned for over 7 years now, and they just didn't know because it didn't make the news because no one reads books.
All right, where do we want to start? Do we just start with Space Marines?
We can start with Space Marines. To walk us through like the buckets or tiers on a tier list or whatever, we're using a tier list to organize this as we record, but it's not a tier list. This is not telling one faction is better than another, although I guess in a way, it's a tier list. YouTube clickbait, it's a tier list now.
It's not a tier list.
It's really sorting buckets.
Yeah.
So anyway, I've got some buckets here to throw things in. To start from lowest and going to highest, at the bottom is You're a Fanfic, Harry.
For the ones that, like, don't really have lore, like Tyranids.
Yeah, Tyranids will be the first one to enter this category. We have the Cringe Zone, which is a special one. You have lore. Everyone who plays this faction yells at people, do not read the lore.
Okay.
It's a special level of hell.
Nice.
We have the Terminal Villain Syndrome. This is for you're never going to get to be the protagonist in a book, but you're in a lot of books as an antagonist.
You come back often enough in the bad guy section that, like, you have lore. It's just not winning lore.
And we'll get into why Tyranids does not belong there.
All right.
Then we have Table Scraps. This is like, I've got a book, or I've got, you know, like maybe 2 books, and one of them's kind of shitting from 2006.
But, like, you actually still have.
You have a piece of lore that you can hold on to and grasp onto and clutch to your chest. Then we've got the one I just called More of This, Please, in all caps. It's, you've got a handful of very good novels.
But we want more because, 1, they were good novels and, like, keep coming with good novels, and 2, like, yeah, you've shown you can do a good job. Let's continue with fleshing out more lore for this faction. Got it.
Then there's the tier above that, which is more than you'll ever read.
I feel like that's hyperbolic.
Talking to the average person, it means you've got enough to choose from. You don't have to be picky.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
There will always be another piece of lore for you.
And there's expectation that, like, it's going to continue coming out with new stuff kind of thing.
And then just for the Zoomers that work for me, because I promised them I would work the word in here this week, we've got 100 books of Yappin', the infinite Yap expansion.
Yapping is a new thing nowadays.
Yappin' is Zoomer or Gen Alpha tech. It's talking too much. It's basically having a podcast. We're yapping.
I feel like yapping has been around since, like, the 20s.
That's my thing, is like yapping makes you sound like a grandpa.
Yeah, because I was like, I know what yapping means, but is that what they think it means that as well?
Here's one. We should actually do a bonus content of me ranking Zoomer lingo.
I'm pretty sure we've threatened this before.
I want to do that one day with some whiskey.
Yeah, well, it definitely needs some type of alcohol.
Yappin', lowest tier of Zoomer lingo. They've got so many good slang terms. It's grandpa tier.
It really is. Like, it feels like I've heard it from my grandpa back in, like, the 90s, and I'm like, yeah, sure, old man. Okay, so Space Marines.
So Space Marines. We started at the beginning of Horus Heresy. I am counting Horus Heresy era novels in this, especially because for Chaos, it's about half of what they have access to.
Which, I mean, I think that's fair. Like you said, Horus Heresy is like the current lore kind of thing. Like, a lot of things have not really changed.
It is one of the largest projects of lore. Whether it's current in 40K, because it's from 30K, is not true, but
I mean, nothing's changed in the last 10K.
Yeah, it's a large modern effort by GW to make a setting and to help explain 40K's setting using it. For those not in the know, we are about to start the next leg of this, which is
the 15th Crusade, right?
No. We're about to start the next one, which is the Great Crusade, where they're going further back in time to explain everything that leads to Horus Heresy.
Ah, so we hit numbers too big. We're reverting. Got it.
Which is my private guess for why female custodes is a thing. Horus Heresy is a sausage fest. And going back further in time, you ain't getting sisters or anything in there.
Oh.
So my guess is they wanted to make some main characters who weren't just a bunch of slabs of meat hitting each other.
Yeah. I mean, there is a certain aspect of, like, you can only have so many of the exact same character and make it interesting.
Yeah. That's my personal top guess. Second would be like the Amazon show 1 and 1 or whatever. But my guess is all of the writers got together to brainstorm for Great Crusade, because, like, Horus Heresy was like a GW got a bunch of writers to, like, enter a stable together and be like, you're going to take this moment, you're going to take this one, you're going to cover this dude, you're going to do this. And then they spread it out so that they could produce 58, 65, God knows how many books in 18 years.
It's a good way of doing it.
It's an endeavor that very few companies have ever tried to pull off, and not successfully.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. But I'm going to bet that since they announced that the next one is doing that, they probably all got in the room and went, we should probably have a few female leads.
It's either that or there was, like, modeling work done, or like a sales guy that was like, hey, we should have a bit for this, and then the modeling work was done and it's like, oh yeah, that'll sell.
So anyway, this episode is full of tangents, but welcome to lore discussions. So, with all of Horus Heresy in the mix here, Space Marines has well over 100 books. Dear God, so many.
Actually, literally, or are you being like...
Just Horus Heresy, Eric, gets you over 50-something.
I mean, that's a solid start, but like, how many can there be more than just Horus Heresy, really?
Almost, actually believe it's more than half of all books in 40K. There is an interesting interview from a while back from one of the authors basically saying Space Marine books sell so much better than non-Space Marine books that authors would clamor to get the Space Marine book.
Okay, so question on that, I guess, and this is another tangent. Is it because a lot of them are like series?
No, I think it's just Unga Bunga Spaceman sells well to dudes on the internet when they're browsing through whatever Audible or something.
Yeah, it's just like, I seen new Space Marine book, sure, buy.
Yeah, even like external people who don't know 40K.
Yeah.
See jacked up, roided Halo Man.
It feels like that's just so many. I guess there are some pretty extensive series, and that always makes things substantially easier if you have like, here's 5 books, here's 4 books, here's 6 books kind of thing that are all like...
Eric, when we get to successor chapters, which I debated doing versus not, I'll spend 3 seconds on them just so that they stop whining. Blood Angels has 3-book series. 3 series on single characters.
I like that. That makes sense to a certain point.
For a single chapter of 1,000 dudes.
1,000.
Within Space Marines.
All right, so like Space Marines, you have infinite amounts of lore to consume. I'm assuming that this 100 books of yapping is like, this is Space Marines.
It's Space Marines. It was the only thing before checking these that I had planned for this category, but we'll get further.
Is there any like call outs you want to make to it?
Sure. I'll preface this before we start recommending books. I have not read every book we will discuss today.
Yet.
I have read a lot of 40K books. I have not read 100 40K books yet, but I've read like literally 40 plus. I might be on like 50 something now.
And you've also done wiki and Reddit posts and all that.
Everything else. So general recommendations: can't get more main character modern era 40K than just go read the Dark Imperium trilogy. Guilliman is a focus, who is a main character in the setting in general and is Primarch of the Ultramarines. And you get to see a lot of other factions who show up and are main characters in it. It's a very good intro in general for 40K, pretty digestible. There's bolter porn for people who need that. It's very skippable though.
No, that's fair. Are there any successor chapters that have a noticeable lack?
So you don't mean successor chapter technically. This is where we get into Space Marine terminology.
Sure.
You mean the non-codex compliant chapters.
Yes.
I think we've been calling them successor here. The special snowflakes.
I'm sure that there's a distinction between that I don't give a shit about. Thanks.
Successors are like the Emperor's Spears, and technically like Black Templars is a successor.
Right, yeah.
But for the main Space Marine factions, I'm pretty sure Iron Hands has next to 0 lore. Salamanders has very little. Raven Guard has very little. I think that's the only ones that are real misses that don't have that much. I mean, like there are successor, no name, we needed a generic Space Marine chapter we could kill all the characters in, who have like 10 plus books. Just random Space Marine man.
We didn't want to have any of the existing lore to deal with, so we made this new chapter and we can do whatever we want with it.
Yeah, so there's billions of those. So into our second one here, Adepta Sororitas. This one is fascinating.
I expect there to be a good amount. I just don't know if it's like good.
This one's fascinating. It's already at more than you'll read. Like just on my short list here, I had 11 books already. That doesn't sound like that many until you realize that Sisters got a refresh army in like 2018 or 2019 or whatever it was.
And like all of these books are from that era forward.
Only 2 out of 11 are from before that.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
Sisters has been skyrocketing in how many books it gets. I assume because they're selling well.
And that's why, like, I've expected that there would be a lot, because I've seen a lot of, like, oh, it's a Sisters book. It's a Sisters book. But I guess that's because there's been a lot since we've started playing.
They are on the lower end of what I consider all of the top factions that own only, in air quotes, 11 books. But they get them basically faster than Chaos Space Marines at this point. I would not be shocked if they are in second or third place overall for how many books a year they're getting.
All right. And like, there's no high expectation that like, oh, there's a series that's wrapping up.
Technically, one of them is like 5 books in, so maybe one is wrapping up, but the point is, I have a feeling they just sell really well and people like them.
That is exciting to know, but unless there's a specific book you want to call out, given that they're all basically from a couple years old.
I don't know any Sisters books. I just know they keep making them. I have zero interest in Sisters of Battle.
Hi there, Bricky from Brad Eat Shit Incorporated. Sisters are a fantastic faction with a great deal of excellent lore, phenomenal design, and I'm not going to hear anything about how hard they are to paint from someone who plays Thousand Suns. Thank you very much for this message. Goodbye.
So let's do AdMech real quick. AdMech shocked me because I didn't realize how many books they kind of have now. Like Sisters, they're newer to have a plastic army, which means they've gotten more focus recently. They've got nothing before 2012, to put it that way.
Okay. How many, is there only really like the one Call book?
Now there's 2 because of Gene Father. And Call shows up in a ton of books, but he's like a single character. So it's like, I don't want to give all those books to AdMech.
Okay, I was like, are we talking about like when Call just randomly shows up in a Space Marine book or a whatever book? That's not being counted. It's like, this is an AdMech book focused up front.
Yeah, other than my personal complaints with Belisarius Call the Great Work, it's still technically a Call book, even if I argue it's still a Secret Space Marine book, because dear God, they spend too much time on those guys. I've never wished for the death of a chapter more from less lore than the Emperor's Scythes. I've known you for half a book, and I already wish that Call hadn't fixed you.
That's actually pretty impressive.
So, AdMech has 7 or 8 books if we're counting Day of Ascension, which is like a really split if it's AdMech or Genestealers. I'll give it to both. So it's 8 books.
I feel like that one's close. I've read that one, and it's very 50-50 of like...
It's a great book, too.
You get the perspectives of both.
And like, Belisarius Call is a good book. The Forges of Mars series is like 3 books long. My brother read the first one and said it's acceptable. He, like me, can find faults in many books, so I'll take an acceptable as a glowing review for most people.
Yeah, it would be like 8 or 9 out of 10 for most people.
They've got options, is my point. I'm going to put them as more of this, please, bordering on more than you'll read, but more of this, please.
I expect that there's going to be more going forward of AdMech, just because like people like Call, right?
Call's a very important character.
Yeah.
AdMech in general are like a super high interest faction that people love. Like, they show up in all sorts of books. These are AdMech books, but AdMech show up everywhere.
Yeah. And like, it's a newer range kind of thing of like, okay, let's make books for the new stuff.
Yeah, I expect AdMech will continue to get stuff.
Cool. Where do we want to go next?
So next up, let's just do Custodes. Custodes, I'm putting in more of this, please, as well. They've got only 5 books. Again, younger faction when they got added to Horus Heresy and 40K. 5 books, but they're all quite new. It's 2 on-running series that are from 2017 to present.
I'm actually kind of surprised that there isn't more.
There's technically more if I start going into like Valdor for a 30K book, the head of the Custodes in 30K, all that. They've got more than that, but like 5 in the 40K era, which was my easy pickings. And then you can get into Horus Heresy era stuff where they are main characters there, obviously, too.
Okay, so there's 5, but there's also like, there's more to it that you can dig deeper if you wanted to, kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're going to be huge players in the Great Crusade, and there'll be large players probably in the Amazon series that'll come out, because everyone knows Henry Cavill plays Custodes, and, you know, it's a guarantee.
Sounds like they would probably be, yeah.
All right, let's go to the surprise of all of this.
Oh?
Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, whatever we're calling them today. I knew going in they would be more than you'll read.
Yeah. Given Cadia.
I've seen enough of the books come out, so I was like, they've probably got, what, a dozen books?
Insert meme.
How many books could it be, Eric?
Yeah.
It's one faction.
Dozens?
So yeah, Guard have a lot of books. I ain't counting these. There's a lot on the list in front of me. Guard is pretty popular to get books from, which makes sense because it's the normal everyman of the setting, and it's your classic sci-fi war story type thing. And I don't have all of Gaunt's Ghost and all of Caiaphas Cain here, guys. This is without those. And this is dozens of books.
I mean, it does just make sense though, right? Like if you're just trying to tell a sci-fi war story without treading too much on like new lore stuff, this is the easy way of doing it. Just find some random backwater world and let's talk about guards' shit life.
Yeah, so while it's not there literally, spiritually, it's going in the 100 books of yapping with Space Marines.
Fair enough.
It is clearly in second place. Now, Sisters may honestly be tied for it on how fast new books are coming out for them, but it's close. And Guard just has the backlog.
Do we know if, there's the Cadians, the Death Corps?
Core. The P is silent, Eric.
I know. I fucking looked at the word. It ruined my head. And I had to stop because I was like, that was pathetic.
They even uselessly make it a K to match Krieg.
Oh yeah, it was
Death Corps of Krieg.
I know that guards got Cadia and Death Corps, but
the S is also silent. That's good enough.
Yeah, that one's good enough.
We know Borrelio kept all his shit in anyway.
So, is there enough of those still coming out? I know, there's some history of them, but are they, in the modern era being ported forward kind of thing?
I don't think we're ever going to get a year without a book from Acadian perspective.
That one makes sense.
I don't know if we've ever been 6 months without one. Krieg is finally getting books because they finally have plastic to sell.
Okay.
Krieg is the opposite, where it has books finally.
And Catachan?
Who the fuck are they?
All right, then.
There are old Catachan books for those who actually care about Catachan.
But, they're not in the modern era. Okay.
I think GW would prefer everyone forget Steel Legion, Catachan, all of that. Now that it's no longer got plastic, I think GW would like you to forget about.
And that's fair. But, it's nice to know that up front if you're interested in that style of lore. Hopefully you like Cadians. Are we finally to Grey Knights, or are you going to continue?
Let's do Imperial Knights real quick. Imperial Knights I'm putting in table scraps.
Really?
They've got 3 books, which you would think is just enough to make more of this, please. But 2 of them I had to Google the existence of.
All right, then.
And the last one's Assassinorum, which is skinned as it's going to be a book about the assassins. And it's really a night book, for anyone wondering. It's a fantastic night book.
They only have 3. That's wild. I guess maybe they just show up every once in a while, right? As oh, we're saved.
Exactly. They tend to be background characters in a lot of books. There is some Horus Heresy stuff, but even then, they tend to focus more on the Titans in that era than the Night Houses.
Oh, and those would be different.
Even Titans are different, and yeah.
I was wondering, I was like, well, shouldn't there be Horus Heresy? We had the Knights and they split into the different, some fell to chaos, and now those houses are there's all the noble houses fighting each other and politics and shit.
It does happen. There are books of that. I don't know them well. I don't know Horus Heresy that well to begin with. I didn't want to include Horus Heresy in any of these counts other than Space Marines for the memes.
I mean, maybe we'll get more if we're going back, right?
I frankly don't know. Knights just doesn't have many books is my point.
That's kind of disappointing.
Now, Grey Knights actually has a pretty good handful of books, and I've heard good things about at least 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, but a bunch of them are only barely within our era.
Oh yeah.
I actually know that because I looked it up and I was like, okay, there's 2 books.
There's 3 books that aren't pre-2010.
Yeah, maybe those books are great. I don't know, but
I'm going to put them in more of this, please, just because I feel like they fall just on the other side. This is kind of the line here, especially because I know I've heard good things about the Emperor's Gift. I'm good with giving it to them, but could use more of anything Knights related, Grey or Imperial.
All right, then.
Before we move on to Chaos and Xenos, I'm going to spend a whopping 10 seconds talking about the Special Snowflake Marines. All of you get at least table scraps. Most of you are in more of this, please, to more than you'll ever read. Black Templars getting more of this, please. Blood Angels, you have so many books. More than you'll ever read, and you're just a Space Marine chapter. Dark Angels, basically the same.
Is there really?
I could lower Dark Angels down to more of this, please. They've got stuff. I'm actually going to give Deathwatch table scraps. Technically, it's got 3 books, but from what I read, one of them is really rough. Did I miss one of you losers? Space Wolves, you have more than you'll ever read.
I was we're missing Space Wolves, which...
God, I don't care.
...is a very important one, Brad. It's a very, very important one. Honestly, it is. It's nice to know that if you're interested in that, there is...
The point is, these singular chapters all get more than some other factions. If you want some suggestions, I would recommend basically anything Dante. Then after reading Dante, read Devastation of Baal. I can't stand Mephiston. Space Wolves I don't know. I don't know basically anyone other than now Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson, Some of the Forest we did a whole episode about. It is extremely good. If you're a Dark Angels fan, go read that. It's fantastic. I say this as someone who is not a Space Marine fan.
I did remember reading some of the intro to that, and it was pretty good. But then we got pulled into reading a different book at the time. Maybe we'll get back to it at some point. We'll see. Does that mean we're finally into Chaos, or do you want to do Xenos?
We'll do Chaos so we can keep talking about Marines for longer.
Yeah. We'll end it on a high note that isn't Marines.
A high note of filling out the You're a Fanfic Harry.
Oh, no.
So, Death Guard, you're in the terminal villain syndrome zone. I'm sorry.
I feel like that's not unexpected for the Traitor Legion type things.
You don't have it the worst. If we want to count Heresy era stuff, Death Guard is a major player there still. They're a player there still.
Oof. Hey, man, they're just a bit slow, okay? They'll get there.
Lords of Silence is pretty beloved by most Death Guard players. You're the bad guy in basically anything Dark Imperium era. All of the Dark Imperium trilogy. Spoilers, the bad guys is Nurgle the whole time.
You don't say that the thing that has Plague War followed by Godblight is Nurgle related.
All of the covers is Gilliman fighting various Death Guard.
Shock.
But you get to be fun antagonists a lot, but you don't tend to star in books.
That's fair.
The villain role is still very fun. I have terminal villain syndrome above cringe zone. Having bad lore is worse than just being the bad guys always.
Well, there's actually a lot of fun that can be had about being the bad guys. If you're the main character, but you're the bad guy, it can still be fun. But yeah, 4 books is not that many.
So moving on, Thousand Sons, you have 4 books. They all start with Ahriman, and they're all written by John French. Not a bad thing, but
it seems like he likes Ahriman.
It's one series. That's all of Thousand Sons lore. And we have stuff from 30K. Magnus is a major character of 30K. Several books there you could go read. So I'm going to say they make it in the more of this please category.
Question on that one, though. For these, Magnus is a very important character, but does that mean Thousand Sons is a leading lore?
This is a personal question for every person who plays their faction.
Like, are you there for the Primarch or are you there for the rest?
And even without the Primarch, are you there for a single main character or are you there for the things that your entire faction has done? Are there people who are like, I love Blood Angels, but I don't love Dante? And it's like, what the fuck?
You're lost. Find an adult.
Here's Mephiston. He's edgy as hell. You'll love him. Go listen to My Chemical Romance while you read it.
Fuck yeah.
Don't actually play that, Berylio. I don't want to deal with YouTube.
Oh, no, that'll get taken immediately.
We'll get 3 notes out of that.
At least. All right, world leaders.
Table scraps. You existed for 3 seconds.
Really?
I think you're probably just terminal villain syndrome. I just want to laugh at the fact that you got the Angron book and that's it. I'm going to say terminal villain syndrome. They are all over the place. Just thinking about it, there's secondary characters everywhere, even in other Chaos books.
What about Emperor's Children?
They're not a faction yet, Eric.
Fuck you. Yes, they are. We got the thingy. It's going to happen. Talk about them.
Not yet.
Talk about them.
Not yet.
Pathetic.
So, Emperor's Children is a weird one if we're going to get into it. 30K, obviously, you've got stuff.
I would hope so. I mean, I don't actually know, but if they don't, then, like, okay, we're fucked.
The, like, 3rd book of Horus Heresy is literally called Fulgrim.
Okay. Good.
I don't know if anyone counts Bile as a... Man, Bile is a great series. I really do want to talk about the Fabius Bile trilogy one day, now that I finished it. I need to go read Genefather. Because it is an extension of Bile lore. So once I'm done with Genefather, I kind of want to do an episode talking about the Bile books. But without giving too much away, I will say it's a good Emperor's Children series, even if Bile is not Emperor's Children, even though he is, even though he isn't. It's complicated. They're very good books.
So maybe there is a little bit.
It's at least in more of this, please.
So you don't have to go all the way back to Horus Heresy to get any of their stuff.
Yeah. We just got Lord of Excess, too. I have not read it. I just know it exists now. So we just got our first modern era Emperor's Children focused, Renegades and Heretic book.
Well, and that's kind of why I, am interested is because, like, it's happening, okay? If it doesn't, GW has royally fucked up. So going forward, is that something that people should expect to have things to read and lore to exist? Or is it like, oh yeah, the range is going to come out, but there ain't shit for it?
I would say yes, there's a good amount.
You've got a guitar.
You honestly get more main character status than World Eaters, if I'm being honest, outside of 30K. Even in 30K. I don't know that much 30K lore, but I can name more books where Fulgrim or the Emperor's Children are a focus than World Eaters.
That's kind of shocking.
Their thing is they're angy. You can only write so many words to say I'm angy.
That's true. Yeah, but it's a good bad guy.
Terminal Villain Syndrome, they do have the tragic, the whole nails, but...
The whole nails.
The whole nails thing.
Yes, very tragic. The whole nails in the head thing, very, very tragic. Okay. CSM.
CSM is more than you'll ever read. There are a lot of examples.
The only question is it up to 100 books of yapping?
If we count Horus Heresy, it still doesn't probably reach 100. It probably gets close, though.
So, like, with Horus Heresy, it's like, there's a lot, but...
Without it, it's still a few dozen, but I expected it, so I don't think I put it all the way up with Guard, and it seems to come out at a slower rate than Guard and Sisters, at least in the modern era. I feel like those two have been boosted. So, still, more than you'll ever read, comes out at a good pace. You'll always have something. You can be picky.
There's going to be more that comes out.
And there's some good books. You get good authors, too, like Josh Reynolds did Fabius Bile. Holy hell, those books are good. ADB does, like, the Night Lord trilogy everyone keeps telling me to read. The Black Legion books. Chaos Space Marines, you get a lot of good choice.
That's nice.
I'm not going into the sub-legions, though. CSM players are not as whiny as Space Marine ones, so I can skip.
Oof.
Let's move on to the sad part here.
The fun part, you mean? Because we're no longer talking about dude in power suit.
Yeah, which is why there are no books.
All right, how?
No, Eric. We're still in chaos.
Oh.
There's 2 factions left. We're out of books.
Yeah, that's not great.
So you're a fanfic, Harry, to Chaos Knights, who really aren't even featured that much as villains even. I've read a lot of 40K shit. Chaos Knights show up essentially in an Imperial Knights book as the villain. That's about it.
It's in one of the Orc books, sort of.
As like a sub-villain.
I mean, they spend like a quarter of the fucking book on it. It was honestly annoying.
I guess. Okay.
It's probably not a quarter of the book, but like, I was there for the Orcs and they were like, let's talk about, and I was like, fuck off, go back to the fun Orcs.
I'm still giving them a you're a fanfic, Harry. I don't think they come up as villains often enough.
That's pretty disappointing.
Chaos Demons.
Oh, this is the one that I am legitimately pissed about.
They float somewhere between you're a fanfic, Harry, and Terminal Villain Syndrome. It's, if you count them, they've got enough books as the villain. It's hard to say.
I feel like it falls to you're a fanfic just because.
The wasted potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel too.
And I am not the most knowledgeable about it, but like I've taken a quick look into some of the Chaos Demon stuff just because.
It's so fun when they show up.
The existential terror that it should instill while reading doesn't exist in any of the books that I've tried to find.
Oh, there is some. One of my favorite things comes from Dark Imperium, the first book of that trilogy.
Okay.
I fucking love the intro to the Nurgle Demons. You get a true horror chapter.
I do know which one you're talking about, yeah.
Like a real fucking horror chapter that leads into the perspective swap of the demons, and it's a clown show of like people fucking around at the office. And it's so fucking good. It's so well done.
That's the kind of stuff that should be far more prevalent just because there's so much potential for it. And like that should be the book's focus kind of thing. Like those should be novels.
I would really like a Chaos Demon series of like, give me just one per god at least from a lot of demon perspective as more than just villains. When they're villains, they're pretty good. When they're not underutilized.
You could still be a villain. It's just they would need to be the main character villain. We're from the perspective of the villain.
So now you bring up my point. Fabius Bile trilogy has demons. They're all over the place. They're like minor footnotes.
They're the environment to overcome.
Correct. They're the like, we're in the warp. This is what chaos is always dealing with, is demons being annoying.
I feel like there could be some really, really trippy kind of books of like chaos demons.
I'm not going to spoil something later in Dark Imperium. There is so much potential from that perspective later in that series.
There's the entire like deep dark warp that, like, you know, the normal chaos demons that we see hide from, essentially, right? Like,
yeah, I get what you're talking about of, like...
There's the real fucked up shit.
Yeah.
Again, it probably wouldn't sell that well, but holy shit, would that be such a cool fucking book.
Man, it sure would be great if we had multiple named Chaos Demon characters with plastic kits to sell that we could write series about. Including a new one who is trying to become the 5th Chaos God.
Even if, yeah, there were some new, like, signpost kind of fantastic models. Yeah, that would be...
Bellicor, present your homework. Where is your lore?
It's been stolen.
Vastor wrote his name on my paper, and it wasn't very good to begin with.
Yeah, that's the worst part, is like Vastor fucking stole the D student's homework.
Anyway, now we can move to Xenos after the sad part.
All right. Tau.
Let's talk Tau. Tau is the first member of the Cringe Zone.
Ooh.
From everything I've read on the subject, Tau has a single series plus a book, all written by the author Phil Kelly. If there's one thing that I've gathered from the internet, it is that Tau players universally hate Phil Kelly, and he seems to hate Tau as a faction.
I've kind of heard that before.
It is something you will find if you look into Tau. If you're like, oh, funny blue fishy looking people, well, they look like cows, but we call them fish.
It's because they're blue. The ocean's blue.
I want to look into their face pussy lore.
Wow, we're back to that, huh?
We're back to that.
Gooning and whatever.
Pussy's top tier. But the Tau lore, when you go to look it up, is not treated so well. It is probably the worst offender. We'll get to you, Eldar. But basically, you have lore and you won't want to read it, is what I have gathered from Tau players.
Yeah, that's pretty disappointing. I mean, I guess, like, go read Gundam.
Go watch G Gundam.
Right? Like, that's your lore. Enjoy it.
I could have named a more serious Gundam series, but G Gundam's probably closer to 40K's level of seriousness.
I feel like it's the expectation of what I would want. It is disappointing, though, because Tau is supposed to have so much more, right? Like, it's a coalition.
Tau deserves better than what they have.
It feels like there should be a lot to it, but I don't really expect any different.
Let's talk about something happier. Orks. Orks is more of this, please.
Hell yeah.
I colored it green on our tier list for a reason.
Wow.
Yeah, Orks is kind of like the Xenos winner, in my opinion.
It's just awesome. And, like, I don't know about older books, but, like, there's been a bunch of new ones.
Almost all of their standalone books are newer or ancient, but, like, they are newer for the most part. But I guess GW found out that they sell pretty well because we've seen quite a few of them in a row now over the last 4 years. I think we've had 4 books.
In some way, I expect that they sell well. I'm not really a lore guy, and I've read most of these books.
I think Gazgul Thraka is an amazing book.
It's fantastic.
With a good audiobook.
Yeah, it actually has a really nice audio. But, like, the book itself, one, is just a fun story, and 2, it's actually written really well. And, like, Brutal Cunning is just good fun.
The Big Daka either just came out or is about to come out. I put it on the list. All right, let's move on to Drukhari. I'm going to put them in table scraps. I almost want to put them in more of this, please, on the promise of literally today or yesterday, they announced that Drukhari's getting a new book for Foot Fetish Lady.
Wow.
I'm blanking on the name right now, so Lilith Harusvex. Thought of that all on my own.
Yeah, you didn't need the co-host. Not at all.
Eric showing his lore knowledge for feet.
You just had to call out Drukhari Feet Lady. Like, I got you covered, bro. I know where the important parts of lore are, okay?
The important part of a woman's body, feet.
It's where it all starts.
The most sensual part of the body, feet.
It supports the rest, man. You gotta have a solid foundation.
A solid foundation. Fucked up, man. Drukhari is going into table scraps. There just isn't enough. From what I've heard, the actual Path of the Blank series for Drukhari is quite good.
They're not just, like, showing up randomly as villains.
Not really. I was shocked when they showed up in the Bile series. I was like, holy shit, one of my factions gets lore.
Honestly, a shocking underutilization of something.
So I do believe there's, like, 2 series of Space Marine books where they show up, but I've never read those.
It feels like the kind of thing that, like, a bunch of guard books should just toss in. Here's a bunch of pirates that came in and want to fuck up the world. Gather the guard.
That's one of my things, though. Like, guard is one of my weak points of, like, I haven't read these 45 guard book either. It's just not my shtick. I don't want to read the red shirts.
Fair enough, fair enough.
So I can't say out of 40-something books that I've seen much Drukhari. And when I see them, I'm normally clapping going, oh my god, it's my mustache-twirling villains. They're here. They're cartoon characters. I love them.
Got Captain Hook on his way.
All right, but let's move on to Eldar, get in the cringe zone.
Yeah?
This is the second of the 2 cringe zone companions here. Repeat what I said for Tau, but replace Phil Kelly with Gav Thorpe. From everything I've ever heard, Gav Thorpe has a fetish, a really obvious fetish. He likes watching the Eldar lose. He's written 7 books about Eldar. All of the books I could find about Eldar within our window except 1.
And they all are not successful in being cool guys.
Eldar players have so many rants I've seen of people complaining about Farseer literally sees the future. That's their shtick.
I mean, it even shows up in Infinite Divine.
Yeah, standing on a hill getting blown up by a random las cannon.
Just like Crossfire got him.
Yep. Other ones where people complain about, like, kids with rock beat them. Really stupid scenarios that I haven't read in detail and don't know how much hyperbole is involved. But the general anger of Eldar players was pretty obvious, and it didn't seem like it was a hot take.
That's pretty disappointing. Does that include, like, the Craft World stuff?
When I say Eldar, I'm saying Craft World, yeah, sorry. Technically, throwing this out there, Harlequins comes out better if you just care about them. There's these 2 audio plays that are very short. They're so well done, and they're amazing Harlequin audio plays. They're about Duruthiel, the Red Swan, and his group of misfits. Fantastic. Would love a 3rd.
All right. I mean, the faction has kind of disappeared, but...
Harlequins also show up more than Eldar as, like, the not an enemy, the frenemy. Like the show up and cackle and, you're dancing along to my plans.
Right. Like they show up and they're not actually fucking stuff up, but like you're always worried. You're like, you're helping me, but this is going to come back and bite me in the ass, right?
I joked in the first Fabius Bile book, I think I sent it out on Twitter of like, no one told me this is a secret Harlequins book. But the Harlequins tend to steal the scene when they show up.
I mean, as they should. But yeah, that's kind of nice, but disappointing about Eldar in general.
Before we go further, Tyranids, you're a fan Vicari, as we talked about. You literally don't get lore.
You kind of are a villain.
This is where I have trouble putting them in terminal villain syndrome. They don't have a character. They're no different than a hand grenade. Can a hand grenade be the villain?
No, but if we scale the hand grenade up to like supernova...
Okay, if there's a ticking time bomb, is the ticking time bomb a villain? Speaking narratively.
Generally, no.
It is a threat within books, but it's not like it's an antagonist. It doesn't have character.
It's more like an environmental act that's being done upon the characters.
Yeah, that's my problem and why I won't put them in terminal villain syndrome. They show up everywhere, but they're not a thing.
It's more of like a macroscopic villain that doesn't actually get lore.
If you are desperate, absolutely desperate for some lore as a Tyranid player, there is a new short story, I think it's called The Hungry Road or something. I have not read it. Someone recommended it to me. I should go out of my way to find it. There is also a couple chapters in Devastation Ball from the perspective of the hive mind, which is what the Tyranids are, is the hive mind.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic, but I'm talking like sub 1,000 words total. That's your lore.
Yeah, which is just not enough.
Even in the Codex, the lore is always like written from someone else being like viewing the Great Devourer.
Right.
And it's like, yeah.
I mean, at that point, a lot of it would feel like it would be like Genestealer lore, right?
So Genestealers is a faction, and we can sidestep our way into Genestealers now.
Because like that would be where you're like, oh, this is the humanization of Tyranids, right?
Yes. And I would put them in terminal villain syndrome because, dear God, are they always the villain. If you open a book and by the end of the first chapter you don't know who the bad guy is, spoilers, it's gonna end in a Genestealer cult. It's the biggest trope in 40K lore. It happened like 6 books in a row to me.
But listen, It's super secret and nobody actually like knows about them until it's too late.
I'm moving them up to table scraps though instead.
Wow. I am honestly shocked just because I figured your personal opinions would be like, fuck them, they're always the villains.
I would be just as happy putting them there. But I'm doing this out of hope. Genestealer Cults had a pair of books I actually had to Google the existence of that existed about the time they became a faction. They also got to be the co-stars of Day of Ascension. It's a basically 50-50 split, beautifully done book by
Adrian Tchaikovsky.
My voice changed there in the middle.
Yeah.
Fantastic book.
It is a really good one. And it honestly, like...
It's not very long either.
Makes me disappointed that there aren't more Genestealer Cult books.
And it's why I'm putting them in table scraps. It's the, I've seen greatness. Now I'm begging for more.
There was a lot of characterization done to Genestealers beyond just like, you're a bad guy.
Whereas usually they're used as a faceless mob of easy to mow down villains who you don't care about.
Yeah. Or like, there's like the scary one that's like hunting or something like that.
Yeah, so well done. So I'm moving them up to table scraps just as like a, like, please.
Keep going.
We've seen it. We know this can be a thing.
Yeah, it would be good. And honestly, Day of Ascension does show such a good way of like Genestealer Cults and somebody else. The interaction with Genestealer Cults and AdMech and whatever guard or whatever you want to do is like, that's where the fun is. That would be cool for more.
All right, before we move on to Necrons for the final tease, you forgot Votann was a faction and so did GW.
Yeah.
Therein you're a fanfic, Harry. One day you'll get a book. I do love the absolute spit in the face of the newest Dawn of Fire book. Is the first Votann book and he's a sub-character to an Ultramarine.
Wasn't there a book that came out like with the Votann of like, hey, Votann's a new thing, they're back, here's a book?
Nope. They got their announcement trailer released as a April Fool's joke, so that was funny, I guess.
It was, yeah.
If only they had followed it up with caring about their lore, it might have not looked like an actual kick in the balls.
So, like, there is lore with Votann. Where does that come from, then?
Within their codex, entirely.
Oh, okay. And then just, like, extrapolated to...
If you can read 40 pages tonight, you will know all Votann lore.
That's crazy.
We need Votann books, please. I actually think I would enjoy them, too. Like, the little we've got, I'm like, I'm in. Let's read about them.
Yeah, especially if they actually like added like some like AI kind of stuff to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Men of Iron, or what do they call them? They're called Ironkin.
Sure, whatever.
The Ironkin, the Votann themselves, all of that is super interesting.
Especially like if they're integrating back into Imperium, like there's tension going on there kind of thing. Like, and isn't there the whole thing of like the Orks like betrayed them or whatever? Like that could be a fun...
Blood X's betray everybody though, but yeah.
No, but like
it'd be a fun story.
It could be a fun one-off story kind of thing. There's stuff to it, but maybe one day. All right, Brad, The Infinite and the Divine was an awesome book.
Twice Dead King is two pretty damn good books as well. I'm going to put them in more of this, please, as like they only got 3 books of note. They've been straight bangers. I need more Necron lore.
I feel like they're kind of like table scraps, but because these books have been so recent.
And some of the best books written in the past few years. They have been so good at developing a faction's lore. These are what Votann needs.
Yes.
This is what smaller factions need that are at table scraps, that are at the cringe zone to fix them up a little bit.
Dude, there's probably a fantastic Chaos Knights book that's like The Infinite and Divine, but like more like internal politics between the Chaos Knight houses.
Oh yeah. Again, and I'm aware there's the Renegade Chaos Knight stuff from Heresy era, but like proper 40K post-corruption Chaos Knights, we don't have anything.
Yeah, I mean, I still want more Necrons, but this does show that, like, you can make good Votann.
You can make any Votann. Just start.
Do we know if there's any Necron stuff coming up?
It is not currently announced, but we do know that for the last, 8 months, they've been hamming up Infinite and Divine because I think it sold 1 trillion copies.
Not shocking at all. It should.
It sits as, the 3rd recommended book to start with, behind the first book of Horus Heresy and the shitty Inquisition book that I don't like, Xenos. It sits behind those for GW's recommended new person lore things, and it's correct to be the actual pick out of those three. Unless you just want to read 65 books of Space Marines, in which case I guess you'd start at Horus Rising.
Yeah, because I mean, like, it seems like it would be insane not to continue, like, from a business idea. It sounds insane to not continue Necron books.
Yeah.
They've shown that they do well, and like there's infinite amount of story about Necrons, right? Like,
yeah, but I do want to point out for people who are like, oh, I'll get into Votann, I know they've got no lore, but they should get some any minute, right? Necrons has existed since like what, second or third edition? I don't know old editions that well, but since we were but wee lads.
The Silver Tide is a thing.
Necrons has existed forever. They finally got lore books. For modern lore, I'm aware they got retconned from being mindless, useless automa to having actual character like over a decade ago to finally having real books about said characters that wasn't just in a codex in 2020.
It's wild.
Xenos is basically NPCs in this game. They are not treated equal to the humans. Lore-wise, we're not going to talk about balance-wise.
Yeah. Eldar have books, but like apparently they're all shit, so.
It is something that is clearly being fixed. Modern lore is a lot more, every faction seems to be getting some.
Yes.
Really telling with the data we've got here in front of us for like when these books came out for each of these factions.
Yeah.
Non-Space Marine books were kind of a rarity pre like 2014.
2014, 2015 is definitely a pretty obvious, oh, we're going to actually invest in that.
Yeah, for a lot of these 2020.
Oh, yeah. It feels like 2014, 2015 was like when they tried it, and then there was some successes, and then like finally they like, you know, there was some success, and so they continued the investment, and then those finally came out in like 2020. Because like the thing is looking at these Xenos ones, there are some absolute bangers of like actual novels, not just Warhammer. Mm-hmm. These are just good books.
Yeah, 40K lore in general. Like if we're talking about Solus IP money grabs that developed lore.
Designed to sell something and then let's add.
40K treats its lore so much better than anyone else. With all the complaints people may or may not have about it. You have no idea how good you have it. As a Magic player, let me fucking tell you. You have no idea how bad it can get out there.
It is absolutely hilarious when like you complain about some stuff like Warhammer lore and like you tell me about some of it and it's like that's some of the stupidest shit ever, and then I think back to some of the shit that you told me about Magic lore and it was like, oh, I can see this being like a real company producing a product compared to
put this in perspective for 40K people, I don't know if Magic has ever gone 5 years without a character assassination of each main character.
Yeah,
with a couple exceptions of people who are literally just caricatures that don't really have a point.
It's either the character itself is, like you said, assassinated because they were actually unique and interesting, or they're characters of big brain main character or...
single aspect people, yeah. The entire character is she makes fire and is a ditz.
Or he's buff and strong.
Yeah, Gideon should have been my go-to.
He's just buff and strong. That's all he's got.
That's literally the joke.
You know, that's fine every once in a while.
No, it's not fucking fine.
It is.
It's not
and
fucking fine for a
say.
main character.
It is okay to have caricatures.
I can tell you so much about Kato Sicarius, an actual meme lord. I can tell you so much about him. Gideon is a fucking buff dude. He doesn't have hopes or aspirations or story. I've read every fucking moment of his Theros story. He is a useless hunk of shit, and I'm glad he's dead.
As a singular, I think it was okay, and holy fuck. We went hard on that towards the end.
I despise sections of Magic lore as a man who has spent far too many hours trying to give a shit about terrible Magic lore. I'm just telling you, 40K people, it can be a lot worse. Be thankful for what you have.
It can be a lot worse, but it can also be so much better. We've seen glimmers of true genius and awesomeness that, like, there's a bunch of these that we've put into the more of this please category. I think it kind of sells what we're saying. Please give us more of it. And And like, we don't need more of the 100 books of yapping, but if that's what you need to produce to make the money to do the other ones,
and I will not fault them doing it.
go for it.
You could make a Space Marine and a Guard book every 3 months for the rest of forever, and I'd be happy as a clam. It ain't for me, but people love it. Go for it. Keep making that.
Please invest some of that revenue back into the other stuff, though, that we're asking more of.
So yeah, for a summary of where we're at, basically if you are looking to get into 40K and you want to get into someone who has a lot of lore to read, Space Marines, Imperial Guard, Adepta Sororitas, and Chaos Space Marines are basically your top picks. You're in good hands with most factions. I'd stay away from things like Death Guard, World Eaters, Tau, Eldar, and the 4 that don't exist.
I feel like Tau and Eldar are one of those.
It's awkward to say. They technically should be all the way up. Like, they have more lore than basically most of the people in More of This, Please, right? They both have quite a few books, but I cannot find good reviews of these books.
And at the same time, like, there's enough potential that, like, going forward, there could be a tone shift and you could have some new stuff, but, like, we can't base anything on that, so.
I'd have to see them start making the turn before I endorse that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's not bad overall. It could be worse, like you said. It could be worse.
All right, after a lot of side tangents and what devolved into a lot of recommendations for books,
Just good fun.
I hope it made up for my negativity last episode, except for that portion where I went off on a tangent about magic lore here. That happens with me. You learn to deal with that. Every one of my co-hosts and editors know about that.
You're just a very emotional person. You become attached to things.
Especially my lore in my games. I am a lore person, and I despise myself for it. If I could give a final piece of advice as we leave, don't take lore too seriously.
Especially Warhammer.
It's a product first. Lore is the excuse.
Just enjoy it for what it is and have fun. Don't be too serious about stuff.
All right, on that note, let's get out of here.
Sounds good.